know, we were all very, you know, anyone close to Dennis, he was, it's corny to say it, but the joie de vivre, the energy that guy had. I mean, when when he passed, something passed, and we all thought he was going to die. I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, the 9 lives was unbelievable. When he was in Cedars in the celebrity nut house, as he called it, there's a celebrity nut ward in Cedars, you know.
Right. The third floor.
No, superstar. Seriously, there's a superstar nut ward.
Used to be the third floor.
When they freak out, whatever, and you know, they're going bonkers, and they can't put them in the normal part of the hospital. It's a celebrity. And Dennis told me, he said, I woke up. And he looked around, there were like, I don't know, 6 maybe, like really famous people, all screaming in straitjackets. And Dennis said, I'm giving up drinking, this is it. And he couldn't get out. You have to have someone to get you out. And it was Bob Rafelson, it's in the book.
Bert Schneider.
Sorry, Bert Schneider.
There's some California
you have to have a
law.
responsible, quote, responsible citizen to say, I will take care of him. So Schneider got him out.
Right.
No, that's quite a story.
It is. It's full of, his life is full of wonderful stuff.
Oh, no, it's incredible.
Wonderful, terrible stories.
Well, it's all wonderful. No, it's all wonderful, terrible. Because when we finished shooting Mad Dog, for example, Dennis. Well, there's a lot of adventures in that, but Dennis rode off on a horse, dressed as Mad Dog, with guns, but they're phony guns. But and he just rode off with 2 bottles of rum. He wanted to pour a bottle of rum on Mad Dog's grave and drink one as well. And anyway, he did that, and then he drank a bottle of rum, overproof rum, which is like really lethal. And then he, for some reason, he got in a car. We don't know exactly what happened. He drove off. The police stopped him, and they threw him in jail. Was beyond drunk driving. And the judge in the morning said, Mr. Hop, I'm looking at your chemical blood test here, and I'm here to tell you that you are clinically dead. And you'll never be allowed to be a driver in the state of Victoria again, New South Wales. And not only that, you'll never be a passenger in a state, in the car, because we're taking you straight to the airport. And they deported him the day after we finished. We ran.
Well done.
Yeah, that was a close call. What was the one where he was running around naked in Mexico, in the street? Is that movie?
That's when he had the first psychotic episode, when he went down in '83 to do this crappy little movie called Jungle Warriors of some West German.
Right.
Because we have to remember at that time the West German, East Germany, some West German production. But he said that he was offered more money than he was ever offered before, and it was only like a 17-line part. So he said, you know, I'm going down and doing it. He needed it anyway. He needed to work. And he said that he's up in his hotel room, and there were 3 complimentary shots of tequila on the bureau or whatever. So being Dennis Hopper, and of course being an alcoholic, what does he do? He downs them. And he later claimed that they must have been doped with LSD or something, because he starts full-out hallucinations, delusional thing. His friends are in the basement being tortured and killed. So he thought he'll get out of the hotel, it'll stop. So he gets out of the hotel, and it gets worse. He feels like there's snakes and bugs under his skin that are like breaking through, so he rips off all his clothes. He's wandering around in the countryside, and then, you know, he thinks that the telephone wires are talking to him. He thought there were lights that were UFOs that were telling him either to go north back to America, or go further south, but he couldn't tell which. And finally in the morning he's wandering around naked on the highway.
That's it.
He thinks the cars are attacking him, so he's throwing rocks at them, and the police subdued him, and finally they got him back on a plane, and that's when he was institutionalized the first time.
Well, you know, Coppola made Apocalypse after I made Mad Dog with him, and Coppola called me, and he said, did you have any problems with Dennis? And I lied and said, no. Why? Did you? He said, well, I did actually. And I said, well, what? And he said, well, could I see Mad Dog? So I said, I'd be delighted. So I flew up there and showed him the film. That's another story. But this is one of the funny bits. Coppola said, I said, what was the problem? He said, he kept changing my dialogue. And I said, like what? He said, well, Dennis is supposed to put his hand on an ox and say, Hiroshima, mon amour. But he keeps saying Hiroshima, Nagasaki, mon amour. I thought it was an improvement actually, but Nagasaki, mon amour.
Or the thing where they did or the fact that he did like something like they went through 40 takes of the scene to one that this video compilation starts with, where he greets the little PT boat with Martin Sheen, and they something like 37 takes, 40 takes, it's all going on all day long, and every time he wouldn't give Coppola what he wanted, and finally Coppola said, Dennis, we've done, I don't know, 37 takes of this thing. Could you just once do it my way? And Dennis Hopper said, Jesus, look at you, Francis, sitting in that chair of yours. For all the footage you wasted, you could do a whole movie like I did with Easy Rider. Exactly. Okay, for you, one time I'm going to do it for you this time, or something like that.
That's funny. Oh, God. Well, you know the story about Brando and Dennis. Because when Dennis arrived in the Philippines, Coppola and Brando were talking. It was dinner. Crew were having dinner.
Right.
And Dennis yelled out, "Hey, tell it. What are you talking about, guys? If you're talking together, you can tell everyone what's going on. What are you talking about?" And Brando said,
"Both Brando and Coppola were arguing all day because Brando did not read The Heart of Darkness by Conrad, which was
I didn't know that part.
The inspiration." Well, this is what Dennis Hopper said on an appearance on Bob Costas' Read to the whole thing in detail, which is also how he never ended up doing any. Actually, was not in any scenes with Brando.
So what I heard, I can't remember where I got this from, but so when Dennis challenged them to tell everyone, the whole crew, what they were talking about, Brando turned to Coppola and said, I don't want to see this asshole again. I'm not going to do any of my scenes with him. I'm still doing the picture. You figure it out. So if you see the film, that's exactly what happened. They're all in totally separate shots. And years later, Brando was going to do a picture for me, and I asked him about it. I said, "Is that true? That story about you and Dennis?" And Brando said, "Coppola was an asshole. It's absolutely true." He didn't like him. He always thought Dennis was copying him because James Dean and Dennis were sort of Brando groupies at one point.
Absolutely.
They'd follow him around to where he drank in bars. I mean, they kind of stalked him in West Hollywood. And it's very funny. So he'd always thought they were like, Brando light. I mean, Brando was thinking these guys are Brando light. There's something to that.
Right, well, Brando disparaged James Dean, and of course, I had that in the footnote, what he said, because one of the reasons he alienated Brando was not only did he interrupt the argument with Coppola, Dennis Hopper misunderstood what book they were talking about, because he had this little he had this Special Forces, the Green Beret manual. One of the few, there were a couple of actual Vietnam veterans that Coppola hired, and one of them gave him this, it's called technically the Special Forces, but it's the Green Berets, little red book, and he kept it in his boot all the time, and he was reading it. And he pulled it out. He thought that's what Coppola said. You didn't read when he came in at the dinner table, he heard Coppola saying, "You didn't read the book?" to Brando, and he pulled it out, and he thought that's what they're talking about. And that's when Brando said, "I don't need this punk Hopper to tell me anything." And then later on, they went to some Filipino bantamweight boxers who were putting on an exhibition in honor of Brando, and Dennis Hopper was, I guess, already said he got into his cups and other things, and out came the resentment for the way Brando had disparaged James Dean, because James Dean, Hopper was idolized James Dean.
They're very close friends.
Right. Well, I don't really think they were that close. They didn't hang out, but.
Well, they did. He was in 2 of the 3 films.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
I mean, he said it wasn't a buddy-buddy hangout relationship he had with James Dean, yet he had an extraordinary influence over Dennis Hopper. Probably the most important influence in his life.
I think it was deep. Yeah. And Dennis told me Dennis could change into James Dean.
I would have loved to have seen that.
That was a really weird thing. His face would just it was really weird. And he would become James Dean.
That's amazing.
And it was really disconcerting, actually. And then he told me in Australia, when he was, God knows, he was on every known drug at the time. But he said that they lived together for a while. And he even had detail about how they'd go down to Arrow Market on Fountain, and they'd get canned stuff, and they didn't have any saucepans in the apartment for some reason. They heated over all this detail. And then years later, when I did a bonus feature thing, I interviewed Dennis for a Mad Dog release.
Right, I saw that, of course.
And I said to Dennis, "Oh, and you told me you lived with James Dean, and can you tell us about that?" And he went, "I never lived with James Dean," and it was like I backed off immediately, but he did for some reason.
He didn't live with James Dean. I guess he must have been, you know, I guess when he was really under the influence. He may have exaggerated some things, but he didn't live with James Dean because at that point James Dean was already on his path to stardom, and he wasn't rooming with anybody at that point. He did. Dennis Hopper, he lived for a while with Nick Adams. That's who he was rooming with.
Which you know from that research.
Yeah, 55, 56. Then, of course, Dennis Hopper, I don't know exactly, I didn't, you know, find out all the real estate records and where was his house, but then he was renting a house somewhere in L.A. on his own, Dennis Hopper.
Well, Sacha told me, I'll get you together with Sacha too, you'd find it fascinating, but Sacha told me, you probably might know the story, but that Dennis was having an affair with Natalie Wood.
That's right.
On Rebel Without a Cause.
That's right.
And Nicholas Ray had his own...
He was having an affair with her too.
With too, and he found out about Dennis. So as you watch Rebel Without a Cause, Dennis slowly disappears from the movie, and he's further back. He's in all the scenes. He starts up front, and then as Nicholas Ray found out about this, so Dennis is way back now.
Right. Well, there's a story in the book Beverly Long, who was the blonde-haired. There were two female members of the gang headed by Corey Allen, and Beverly Long was the blonde ponytailed one, and the other one who I did speak with. Fortunately, actually, in 2007, was Steffi Sidney, who was the daughter of Sidney Skolsky, who was once a big Hollywood columnist who had his office on the second floor of Schwab's drugstore, the eternal hangout for Hollywood wannabes. And Beverly Long said, actually, I just quoted this from, there's a quite good book about the making of Rebel Without a Cause by two authors, so Al Wiesel, who unfortunately died quite recent, not that long ago, prematurely, and Frashella. But she said that they were doing the planetarium scene, and Dennis Hopper, when they took a break, said, I want to go get a hot dog or something like that. She said, don't, because the assistant director will call for us soon. And he went off somewhere, I don't know where. And of course, the assistant director pretty soon said, come on, everybody, you know, let's get going, action. And Dennis Hopper, who was needed, of course, was nowhere to be seen. And it became a big deal. Steve Trilling, who was one of the top functionaries for Jack Warner, showed up. And then Dennis shows up, you know, with kind of this, oh, gee, you know, kind of like, what's going on? And Nick Ray was standing on the top of the stairs in front of and said, you're fired, and get you out of the movie. And Steve Trilling had this cigar in his mouth, said, no, you can't do that. We have him under contract. You can't fire him. So Nick Ray say, okay, I can't fire him, but I'm gonna cut all his lines of dialogue. That's what.
Well, you know, behind that was the Natalie Wood thing. He knew that he would.
They had a big clash over the mutual animosities, and he had also. I won't. But people can read it. We'll read it in the book. But
later he helped him, and then he helped him later on.
Dennis did. Well,
Nick Ray
I found out. Well, he lived in Towels Nick Ray lived in Towels for 5 months with Dennis.
Yeah.
At that point, Nick Ray was just a shambling wreck. It was terrible. And actually, I found out only after I finished the book. It's always been assumed that it was Dennis Hopper who got Nick his teaching gig at Harper College in Binghamton, film class.
Is that true or not true?
Actually, it was the invitation of somebody at the school. Right. Although I read recently that Dennis wrote him a letter of recommendation.
Right.
Yeah. Right. But there were after he did The American Friend, they did that movie together. There was a reconciliation, and at that point, neither of them was holding any grudges, or it was all in the past. Yeah. And they did bond again, and then he also met Nick. Well, he first actually met Nick when he was in Cannes in 1969 for Easy Rider, and Nick Ray was trying to unload the rights to a screenplay by Dylan Thomas that he owned, and he ran into Dennis Hopper, and Nick Ray hit him up for some money, and he said, I don't have any. And he said, well, go ask Schneider for some. So he went and he got $500 for Bert Schneider. He gives it to Nick Ray. An hour later, he comes back. I need more money. Well, what happened to the $500, Dennis Hopper says? I lost it gambling, because Nick Ray was a compulsive gambler. Okay? That's all.
Yeah. Jeez. The stories. We're going to let you go. Great pleasure, my friend.
It was a pleasure
keep
to
in
see
touch.
you. I will, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's nice to meet you, too. Thank you so much.
Well, fantastic.
I'm delighted.
Well done. I think it's going to be very well received.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Can I have your autograph, please?
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah.